I am embarking on my most ambitious historic crafting project to date. That is making a 19th century pillow. Now you're thinking, how is a pillow your most ambitious project to date? Well, dear artisans, it's because of the expense of what I'm doing and the fact that it is way above my skill set in this particular area, and I'm really challenging and pushing myself. I will be doing a silk shading embroidered floral bouquet on the pillow. I have never done that type of embroidery before, even though I've done other types of embroidery. Just the expense of the materials and how it could go completely wrong is terrifying to me, and I don't know if I can execute it. And my mother picked this beautiful pattern from the 19th century for me to put on this pillow for her, because I will be making it for this club chair that my mother recently had my father reupholster in a cotton velvet material. I will be tallying my time. I don't usually do that, but I am curious to see how long this is going to take. I will, of course, practice my technique before I attempt to do it on the pillow with the uber expensive materials. Yeah, I am completely in over my head and absolutely terrified. And I know it won't be perfect and there'll be lots of imperfections, but isn't that what we do here? Isn't that one of the reasons why I started this YouTube channel, was to remind myself that imperfections are our signature? Things will not be perfect because they're being made by humans. Now, the first thing I'm going to do in this project is sketch out exactly what the pillow is going to look like. So that's step one.
Now, before I can even draw my plan for the pillow, I need to know how big to make it. As you can see, there is a big gap between the back of the chair and the seat of the chair. Therefore, I have to make sure that the pillow won't fall in that little gap when somebody goes to sit back and lean against the pillow. I took an insane number of measurements, most of which are probably completely irrelevant to how big the pillow would need to be, but I concluded that the pillow needs to be 15 inches long and 13 inches wide. The pattern my mother chose was taken from a book of early American embroidery compiled by Dover Press in 1975. While each pattern did not have a direct citation, most of the patterns came from Goody's Ladies Book and Peterson magazine circa 1830 to 1880, as well as the William Briggs and Company Album of Pattern Transfers circa 1874. They also cite, quote, other early American sources, unquote, as well. Based on the patterns I've seen in Goody's and Peterson's, this style does not match, nor does it match any of the patterns contained in the William Briggs and Company album, so I surmise this was the work of an individual woman drawing her own designs. Notice how much more detailed it is, with the shading for more dimension. The history of embroidery during the 19th century in America was influenced by the impacts of the Industrial Revolution. At the turn of the 19th century, embroidery had moved away from the wool crewel work inspired by English methods, and was now in a silk embroidery craze. According to Candace Wheeler, the mother of interior design, and whose 1876 pillow serves as my inspiration for this project, due to natural extravagance and national influence, silk became de rigueur, and while more expensive, was preferred over the linens being used in England at the time. Led by the Moravians and their Bethlehem work, dame schools or finishing schools opened across the country, teaching girls fine ornamental embroidery that included the ubiquitous sampler. Young ladies would go to these schools in preparation for married life and saw decorative embroidery as an accomplishment to show off and, once married, acted as a pastime for those who could afford servants and thus had more time to devote to hobbies. Silk pictorial embroidery was viewed as the pinnacle of this accomplishment for a young lady. However, some girls joined for the actual education of fine embroidery techniques. Silk on satin became a popular technique, which is evident in samplers of the early 19th century. Floral embroidery was the most common type taught by the Moravian sisters, which is the motif we are working on in this recreation project. What enabled silk to be more accessible was the opening of trade out of Salem, Massachusetts after the American Revolution, as well as a domestic push to cultivate mulberry trees. Benjamin Franklin fundraised for the silk industry in Philadelphia in the late 18th century. Silk sewing thread began to be manufactured in Massachusetts. By the 1830s, everyone was gaga for silk manufacturing, in a mania that spread across the US to varying levels of success. But with all the prospecting, the silk bubble burst by the mid to late 1830s due to overcultivation, as well as a brutal winter that killed most of the trees. However, companies in Massachusetts, the center of silk manufacturing and culture in America, persevered. And while they did stop planting for a few years, they eventually began again. For example, in 1838, the Nonotuck Silk Company began manufacturing Corticelli silk thread and continued to do so well into the 20th century. Mills in Pennsylvania and other parts of the U.S. also persevered and manufactured silk into the 20th century as well. Also in the late 1830s, the formal instruction of fine needlework ceased due to the onset of the Industrial Revolution. In 1839, Massachusetts opened a teacher instruction school, which was the first of its kind to provide publicly funded education to women for employment outside of the home, as more people were moving from the countryside to the far more crowded cities for factory work. The decline in ornamental needlework continued in America until Candace Wheeler attended the 1876 Centennial Exhibition of Women's Needlework from the Royal School of Art and Needlework, which was founded in London in 1872 to revive needlework arts. This, of course, was spurred by William Morris and the arts and crafts movement. Candace decided to form a similar society in America called the Society of Decorative Art. The society held fairs for such women to sell their work to raise funds for charity. However, feeling the board became too elitist, she left and co-founded the New York Exchange for Women's Work in 1880 with the more middle-class board. She saw fine needlework as a lifeline for women to earn extra money from all walks of life, especially those in the middle and upper classes who fell in hard times where there were few respectable employment options besides a governess or a teacher. This was especially true in the aftermath of the Civil War that left many women widowed. Soon after, women's exchanges were established across the country. Along with this, the end of the 19th century saw a revival of decorative embroidery techniques on both sides of the Atlantic. I love that the history of embroidery ties so deeply into the trials and tribulations of women. It is with this knowledge that I go into this project with a great sense of responsibility to pay homage and respect to women of all times and social classes. I started the sketch of my design by drawing the outline of the pillow along with the measurements, and also indicating where the silk velvet would end and the silk du peony would begin. Since I'm not the best at drawing, I used tracing paper to transfer the pattern onto my sketch. Since I knew what colors I was using, I did a rough coloring in of the pattern, as well as colored in the hues my mother chose for the silk du peony and silk velvet, gold and teal respectively. I will not be referring to this sketch during the embroidering process. It is simply a big picture view of the final completed pillow. My Bible for the embroidery portion of this misadventure will be the Royal School of Needlework's Book of Embroidery, which provides instructions on the techniques and tools required to successfully complete your silk shading project based on historic methods. While this embroidery technique was called silk shading because silk thread was originally used, today, cotton and synthetic threads such as rayon are widely used. I was surprised to discover that there is an enormous amount of planning work involved, wherein one has to create 4 different diagrams of the design to guide you on your silk shading journey. One diagram for the order in which to embroider the elements of the design, one diagram to indicate the stitch direction of each element of the design, a third diagram with the colors, and finally a grayscale diagram showing the tones and shadows of the design. While I was overwhelmed by all of these diagrams, as I made each one, I could see why one needs all of these cross-reference diagrams to be successful in your project. Starting with the order diagram, I carefully studied the pattern, marking off the order that each element of the design needs to be embroidered in. Silk shading works back to front, meaning the sections that lie in the back of the design are completed first to help create the sense of three-dimensionality. While I don't necessarily have to complete the design in numerical order since some areas are independent of others, such as the butterflies, as long as I start with the lowest number where sections overlap, I will follow the back to front rule. I counted 129 sections. Great Caesar's ghost, dear artisans. What am I getting myself into? The second diagram I made was stitch direction. There are 2 types of stitch direction. Tapestry shading, where all of the stitches are vertical regardless of the shape of the design, and 2, natural shading, where the stitches follow the shape of the design. I will be using natural shading and thus marked my second diagram with red lines to indicate the direction I need my stitches to go as I embroider. So far in my practice projects, this is the element I am having the most difficulty mastering. The third diagram for the color was the funnest diagram since it was like doing a coloring book. I gathered some photos of flowers and butterflies to use as guides on how to color the design. You can be as realistic or phantasmagorical as you want in this arena. However, having the real flower photos was a huge help since I am using a pattern drawn by a lady 200 years ago and have no idea what colors were intended. I also chose my flower colors based on what would look good with a gold background color and fit in well with the teal color of the velvet fabric, which will make up the majority of the pillow. The coloring of this diagram is far more accurate than what I did on my project sketch, which is why I will be using this to guide my thread colors. And last but certainly not least, the tonal diagram. This aids in distributing the colors to maximize shading and blending to recreate the best dimension possible. While you can always photocopy the color diagram in black and white and call it a day, but since I am quite pedantic when it comes to all things historic, I opted to color it in grayscale myself. Going over the design again and again proved to be helpful as well. I want to know this pattern like the back of my hand, so hand coloring the same diagram in black and white, while tedious, was certainly helpful in the long run. I know you're all wondering about this. I know those birds are so adorable, but I thought it would be way too much in terms of design and also in terms of what I had to embroider. Almost 130 sections were already pushing me way over my skills. I will be using these cuties at some point in the future when the right project comes along, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it when it does.
Okay, we have our plan. Now, let's talk materials. This is the fabric that my father used on the chair. It is a cotton upholstery velvet, so the pile isn't very high on it. You might even call it velour, but I was with them when they bought this, and at the fabric store, it was called a cotton upholstery velvet. So it is this kind of nice mauvey pinkish color. My mother wanted a teal and a gold pillow to go with it. So kind of jewel tones, I think. We're kind of in that neck of the woods. This I ordered on Etsy. According to the listing, it is 100% silk velvet. And I have to say, and the backing is definitely silk. The only way to truly know is to burn it. But when I start cutting it up, I will do a burn test. Absolutely gorgeous teal color here. We have that. Now, the insert the embroidery will be done on is going to be the silk dupioni. Am I pronouncing that right? Soup duponi. I mean, I'm loving the color palette here. We've got kind of the mauvey pink with the teal and then the gold insert. It's gonna look really good. We're going to need a backing fabric for the silk that I embroider on, because silk du pion, even though this type of silk is a really robust silk in the world of silks, it's still not robust enough to be embroidered on its own. So I'm going to be using a backing fabric. I have a few different backing fabrics of different thicknesses. This is a lightweight muslin.
Some housekeeping on what I mean by muslin. I am not talking about the gauzy organza lightweight cotton loved during warmer months, as used in this mantle circa 1860. I am speaking of the thicker muslin called calico in the UK that is used as a mock-up fabric and for petticoats, linings, and such. It is lighter than canvas or duck fabric. In the US, calico is printed cotton, usually with a floral design, such as this dress. The meaning of the term caught on in the mid-19th century due to the popularity of these imported printed fabrics from England. Okay, back to our regularly scheduled programming.
This is a medium weight muslin, and then this one is actually a canvas duck cloth. Now, I didn't intend to use this. It is way too thick to be using as backing, but the reason why I bought it is because I might use this as tape on the slate frame instead of using twill tape, even though I did purchase twill tape.
To sew the pillow, I bought 100% silk Gutterman thread in teal and in sand. Believe it or not, sand was the closest color to the gold I could find. Now, I'm not sure if I will be using the sand thread at all, but I wanted it on hand just in case. For the embroidery floss, I wanted a nice sheen which cotton could not provide. So I splurged and bought silk embroidery floss made by Avera Soie from their Soie d'Alger collection of spun floss. Initially, the salmon colors were for the roses, but once I saw the colors against the gold silk, I decided to swap them with the pink. So now pink for roses and the salmon shades to mix in with the green shades for the rose leaves. Yellows, oranges, and browns were chosen for the butterflies. Of course, there'll be some black in there as well, and maybe a sprig of red. For the flowers that I can't identify, the main palette will be purples, whites, and grays.
It's going to look really beautiful. I am excited, and I really hope my embroidery skills come on through. I've been practicing really hard. But there's nothing like doing something where you're in over your head to really challenge you and to kind of inspire you. You kind of have to inspire yourself sometimes. You can't always get it from the outer world or from other sources, even though everything from the 19th century inspires me. I've done all my planning diagrams for my silk shading. I've got all my materials. The next thing to do is execution. So I will see you in the next episode where I will be starting on this arduous journey where I'm in way over my head in terms of skill. The stakes are not only high because of that, but because I'm using really expensive materials. But alas, dear artisans, this is what we're here for. We're here for crafting misadventures. I will see you in the next episode where we will go forth on the next step in this misadventure.